Carl Baker. Now, there's a name I remember from days gone by. Carl Baker is the executive director of Pacific Forum, right down the block across the street on the other side of Tamarind Park here in downtown Honolulu. We are so happy to have him here. Hi, Carl. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again, Jay. Talking about a different topic this time.
Yes, well, there's so many topics to talk about these days. Yeah. It's a great, big, wide, wonderful, maybe not so wonderful world out there.
It certainly is a changing world.
Yeah. Let's talk about Hong Kong. Hong Kong is all the rage. And our title today of this show is, Will Hong Kong Ever Be the Same? You and I had talked before about what a genteel, civilized place it was, and everybody doing business. Business was the word of the day everywhere in Hong Kong forever since, well, way before, the agreement of 1997. And now it's not the same, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, it was always easy to say Hong Kong is all about money. If you go to Hong Kong, everybody is looking for how to make money. Today, people are saying, I think I'll just pass on that trip to Hong Kong. They aren't trying to make money anymore. They're trying to make violence in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, really tragic what happened. I didn't really understand exactly who was out in the street, but it sort of unfolds on you after a while, and you find out that who's on the street are young, they're students, they don't have a lot of money. They may work for big organizations, but they don't have a lot of money. They live in little wee tiny apartments, a lot of them. And they're not necessarily happy. And when you start out with what is a civilized kind of protest, it has the real possibility of degrading into a violent protest.
Well, I think that's what probably surprised us the most is, when this first started, it was all about the extradition treaty to send somebody to Taiwan for a crime that they had committed. And all of a sudden, it turns out to be much more than that. I mean, it was just sort of the spark that lit the fire. And the real fire was, as you say, it was about crowded conditions. It was about inequities in the system that's been Hong Kong for a long time. It was frustration with the lack of progress in making Hong Kong something other than a British colony. And the Chinese aren't happy with what's happening, and the Hong Kongers aren't happy with how China is treating Hong Kongers. And so you had the bookstore disappearances, you had frustration with lack of housing, and all of a sudden these issues are now all there in front, and looks like they're there for a long time.
Yeah, and now they're popping up in a way that is not leaving a lot of options for either side. It's like, somehow the piece in the paper about the students in the university, in the technical school there in Hong Kong, where they got kind of locked in by the police, no way out. That's what it sounds like. You want to come out, you get arrested with the other 5,000, and we just put you in the slammer. You don't have choices anymore. We're narrowing your options.
Yeah.
And this is like a kind of a metaphor for the whole thing. Your options, you people in Hong Kong, your options are being narrowed.
Yeah, and China is really in a hard spot as well. I mean, it's not a matter of just saying we're going to go claim our territory, we're going to go and put these people in their place, because China also recognizes that there's a lot at stake here. That if it isn't careful, it loses that financial link that has been Hong Kong. What they inherited in 1997 was a full-fledged node in the global international market financial system. And all of a sudden, this is now becoming at risk because China hasn't been able to integrate itself into the international system. So, for China, there's no easy answers either, because they can't just bring in the military. They have to be very careful in how they handle it, because there's people in Taiwan that are looking at one country, two systems. That didn't work too well in Hong Kong. We know it's not going to work well in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So it's also a model that Taiwan is watching very closely.
Yeah, let's talk about Taiwan, because you were just there and you could see the reaction of people in Taiwan to what was happening in Hong Kong.
Yeah, and I mean, in Taiwan, it's a validation of what the independent inclined people, I guess I'll say, in Taiwan always felt, is that one country, two systems is not workable. we cannot allow them to think that it's workable in Taiwan. And so, as I said, this just validates everything that these people always believed. So in Taiwan, what's happening now is it's influencing the presidential campaign, which of course is in January. President Tsai Ing-wen is the incumbent, and she has been very strong in demanding recognition of Taiwan as an independent entity, not to say that an independent Taiwan, but certainly an inclination towards independence. And the whole one China policy has been her suit from the beginning, saying that we cannot have the one China policy. And of course, Hong Kong just validates that for her. In the case of the main competition, Han Kuo-yu, he's saying, well, I really want to improve relations with China, but Hong Kong makes it very difficult for him to make that case because if China overreacts, then he really looks bad, and he's trailing the campaign because of that.
But that is the reality. That is the greater possibility that it's a trap.
Yeah.
Taiwan may agree to some kind of a denouement, but at the end of the day, it's going to be at risk to China's aggressive policy.
Yeah, and both domestically, if you look at are they ever going to be able to gain control of Hong Kong? Are they ever going to be able to accommodate some of the demands for more independence in Hong Kong now that this is happening? And then again, going back to the international component is also important because everybody's watching them. And as the financial firms start saying, boy, we really can't afford to stay here anymore because Hong Kong isn't all about making money anymore. It's now about risk for your employees. It's risk for your financial assets that are there. So, the whole thing is a very difficult situation, certainly for the protesters. Let's not forget them. I mean, these kids are going out and taking their life and putting their life at risk by confronting the police. And they have been very aggressive with the police, and the police have been sort of casual about it. The Chinese, we've seen signs that they've been building up military forces in Shenzhen, waiting to go over, but they've been very reluctant. I don't know if you saw the news over the weekend, but they were talking about the soldiers that are garrisoned in Hong Kong had gone out and cleaned up the streets as kind of a cameo appearance.
In civilian clothes.
In civilian clothes, so you can see that China recognizes the risk of introducing that military element.
Meanwhile, they got the soccer stadium in Shenzhen full of tanks,
right,
ready to cross over, ready to quell anything. And actually, from one side of it, from Xi Jinping, we need to talk about him and how he sees this. Xi Jinping has the justification to go in there and say, this is unstable. We cannot tolerate an unstable situation on our back door here. We have to go in and quell the disturbance.
And that's the rhetoric. That's the rhetoric that's coming out of Beijing. But as you watch them in action, you can see that that's an easy thing to say, but their decisions to move that forward are going to be very calculated if they ever do it at all.
Devil in the detail.
Yeah, the devil in the detail. So yeah, you've got your tanks setting in Shenzhen, but that has not intimidated the protesters.
Yeah.
And I think actually probably the group of protesters is growing as they become more and more emboldened by what the students have been doing. And
Carrie Lam continues. It's amazing that she's still there. It would be a better idea, wouldn't it, to remove her?
Well, I thought that that was going to be the intermediate solution, was to simply say Carrie Lam has lost her authority and that we're going to replace her with someone else. The problem, I think, is that it does show a loss of face domestically for the Chinese leadership, for the Chinese Communist Party. So if they do that, then does that embolden people in Tibet? Does that embolden people in Xinjiang to do something similar? I suspect so, and I suspect that's why they're reluctant to do that, because very much Carrie Lam was basically appointed by the CCP. And so to move her out of the position sort of puts them at risk in the rest of China. So again, it's a very complicated situation for the leadership.
And if China appoints somebody else like Carrie Lam, they're going to have riots on that point alone.
Right. Then the whole issue that the Hong Kongers have been arguing about with the lack of freedom to choose is going to come to the fore. So you know, they're stuck with the policies that they've been reluctant to implement in terms of fair housing, in terms of equitable distribution of wealth and all that. That has always been a problem in Hong Kong. And then if, because of that, they're very limited in how they can move forward to start trying to reestablish authority through their person in Hong Kong. What I'm forgetting her name, her title right now. She's the
Chief executive?
The chief executive, I think, is what they call her. Yeah.
Yeah, but this has been a bad week for Xi Jinping. I imagine he and his friends have been talking, thinking, strategizing about this for the last 5 months, but much more intensely right now. And one of the reasons I say that, I'd be interested in your reaction, is the release of those documents, the leaking of those documents, several hundred pages of documents demonstrating that he has been treating the Uyghurs very badly. And then we have one woman who somehow got out of there, and she's complaining about it. And it becomes an international storm, a controversy of major magnitude right now.
Yeah, and so on his periphery, you know, he has this whole image of a strong China, of a prosperous socialist society sort of crumbling before his eyes. You know, where he's been, you know, talking about how China is emerging as a world power and respected by the region. And all of a sudden, he has regions inside what they consider the one China as collapsing on itself. And so, you know, now he has to start answering questions about what's really happening in Xinjiang. It's becoming more and more difficult to deny that they've actually imprisoned a lot of people and, you know, and basically eliminated the opposition in that area. So, yeah, so Hong Kong just sort of becomes a more visible and a more urgent matter than Xinjiang, because Xinjiang you can sort of push aside, say, that's a remote area.
It's harm's way.
There's nothing that really happens there. Now it's not only that part of his society crumbling, but it's the society that was really always the center of attention for the international community. That Hong Kong has always been the entry point into Greater China and China's entry point into the rest of the world. So it's really becoming difficult. And now we'll see what happens in Taiwan, because the elections are in January. You know, so this is something that's going to come up too. And so then he's got the whole periphery looking very shaky in terms of his ability to actually control those areas that he never had that good of control over.
You said a minute ago that you know that there would be a loss to him if the financial center in Hong Kong was unable to function. But I remember, this must be also 10 years ago, when maybe it was before his time even, when the Chinese decided they're going to make Shanghai into a financial center also. And we're going to make it sort of like Hong Kong in the sense that it would be an entryway for capital and business. And I thought at the time, just me, but I thought at the time, this is a way to undermine the primacy that Hong Kong had. But you suggested a minute ago that hasn't worked out that way.
My sense is that Shanghai has worked out maybe as a stock market, but the financial center, you know, the banks in Hong Kong have remained the primary focal point, and that's where the financing occurs. But again, see, it goes back to China's inability to actually implement effective reforms. Because if you're in Shanghai, you don't have the option of sending large sums of money out of your bank because you're in China. You know, in Hong Kong, they've sort of kept these provisions where you can move large amounts, so you don't have to worry about the $50,000 personal limit. So what you see is you know, the Chinese have taken advantage of that system and have continued to use those Hong Kong banks for big transactions. And so, yeah, Shanghai is there, and the Shanghai stock market may work okay compared to the Hong Kong index. But when you look at the rest of the financial transactions that China relies on, that's where Hong Kong plays the big part.
I went to a party once in Hong Kong, and I managed to sit among all of these banker-type, investor-type people doing business in Hong Kong. And one thing was so clear to me, Carl, is they were feeding capital into China at a really rapid rate, making tons of money doing it.
Sure.
But they were important to offshore investment coming into China. It's like a membrane, it's a one-way membrane kind of thing.
Yeah.
And China needed that to happen because it had no other way to do it.
Yeah, because there's no easy way to transact with the Chinese market inside of China,
Yeah.
and that's why Hong Kong has served. And you say one way, but I say it's really two ways, because you've also got the taipans from the rest of China moving that money back into Hong Kong to invest it in the
Everybody
rest of the world.
wins. Yeah, I take your
everybody
point.
wins. Yeah.
So here we are, and people are on the streets. These are the very same people that staff the banks, that work in all these tall buildings, the financial district, which is a good part of Hong Kong. These are the people who make it happen, even though they're not the executives. I doubt the executives are on the streets, although some may be. Some of the people in the universities, including senior faculty, are on the streets. But what does that mean for this financial district we're talking about? Could they be actually functioning amid all this chaos?
Well, they seem to be. You know, I was with someone that works in one of the banks, and they said, oh, it really isn't that bad over by the Admiralty down in Main Street, Hong Kong. So he seemed to say that it really isn't affecting the bank in terms of physical access to the building and the ability to continue to transact business. So I think remarkably, there seems to be some level of organization yet within the businesses, but I don't know how much longer that can last. As I said, it started off, it was really isolated in the area of the government offices, but now it's
the
spread
umbrellas
out.
And all that.
Yeah, but now it's it's spread out to Hong Kong Polytechnic, which is over on Kowloon side. And they've had several demonstrations in the department stores, the airport, the tourist district, across on the Kowloon side. So it's moving more and more where it's affecting the larger population in Hong Kong. And they've even talked about some, as you remember, there was talk about one of the train stations up by Shenzhen, up by the border. So it's spreading around, but apparently they're still able to function. But what I'm seeing is, there's more talk about the banks just simply saying we can't afford to be here anymore. This is becoming too risky.
Or the investors.
Or the investor.
Who feed that capital into the banks. So the banks, I can see a European investor saying, oh, no, this is not for me.
Yeah, let's hold off and see how this plays out. I think the longer it goes on, the more you're going to see that sort of mindset come in, that people are simply going to start looking for alternative routes into Greater China.
Now, what about the American thing? There's a resolution in Congress. I think it might be both houses even to say, why don't you cool it, boys?
Yeah, I don't think the Senate has passed it.
I don't think it has it. Say again?
I don't think the Senate has passed it. The House has.
The Senate doesn't pass anything.
Yeah. Well, it depends.
Anyway, there's an erstwhile possibility, at least in the House. And the president, I don't think he's done anything. So the question is, A, is that the right position for this country to take? And B, is if we took a position, a more vociferous position, and try to, sort of jawbone the thing, would that help?
Well, it would certainly put pressure on the CCP to do something. But I think it almost has to be a broader statement by the United States at this point that includes Xinjiang. And certainly we've done a lot to support Taiwan. If you go back and look at all the peripheral areas of what we're doing, we've certainly gone on board with Taiwan and have tried to integrate Taiwan into the broader Indo-Pacific strategy that we're trying to implement. We've certainly talked about, increasing the level of exposure to senior U.S. officials for Taiwan. We haven't done much with Xinjiang or with Hong Kong yet. So I think if you take those two, I think there has to be something from the United States that makes some statement about humanitarian conditions and humanitarian concerns that we have in both of those areas. The problem, of course, is that, quite frankly, the Americans have lost a lot of their moral authority in these areas because they haven't done much, and they haven't been very vocal in any of these areas in terms of human rights concerns or in terms of promotion of democracy. So it becomes the longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes.
Time counts on this.
Yeah.
In a better time, I suppose, had the president stood up, made a moral statement about it, discouraged the violence, discourage the oppressiveness. It might have had an effect. And furthermore, it might have had an effect on other countries who would have joined in the chorus.
Well,
I don't think it has an effect on anybody right now because of that moral deterioration.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what we're starting to see, not just in this area, but all over in Asia, is that the United States is simply losing its position of leadership, and that's what you get. You don't have other countries willing to stand up and say this is wrong, because it's always been dependent on the United States to sort of take that lead, because it is the major power. It is the biggest amount. And so yeah, I think that we do have a problem with that, and I honestly don't see very much forthcoming other than a sense of Congress sort of resolution.
Yeah, that's not going to happen, and everybody will know that it's the second best.
Yeah, everybody recognizes it for what it is.
Yeah,
it's a sense of Congress, which is interesting but peripheral.
We really have lost a lot of our authority here and influence.
Yeah, in so many, and this is just one example of where that shows and how it plays out.
So in 1997, it's a turnover. There was an agreement for autonomy, and part of that agreement was that it would last 50 years, and that means to 2047. 2047 is, well, gee whiz, it's not that far away. And at that time, I'm not sure that the agreement is specific about this, but at that time, China will have a different situation on its hands, and the people in Hong Kong won't have the same argument that they're supposed to be semi-autonomous or autonomous. And as we get closer to 2047, there are transitional issues that will arise. And that all focuses into what can Xi Jinping do, given the deterioration of the American position, or given the 24/7 date, whatever it means, given the violence, given the need to protect his own image and the stability of China in general, and China's sphere of influence around the world. What are his options, and which one do you favor?
I mean, his options, as you started off with, his options are fairly limited here. And he has to somehow start thinking about how does he demonstrate his capacity to hear what people in Hong Kong are saying. They've taken a couple small steps. Carrie Lam has announced, that they'll work on public housing. They'll work on improving the plight of the common people and all that. But it's going to take more than just words at this point. They're going to have to take some serious action. And I think his first option has to be to start talking about replacing Carrie Lam, and there has to be some input from the Hong Kong people. I mean, that is, I think, just absolutely mandatory for him to move away from the confrontation in Hong Kong, and also to start thinking about what happens in Taiwan, because again, Taiwan and Hong Kong are playing off each other here, and so I think that, to me, is the preferred option, that he take action and say, okay, we have a problem, we recognize the problem, we're going to deal with Hong Kong as we promised back in 1997, and start taking some sort of reform that involves the Hong Kong people in choosing that leader and recognizing that he cannot simply appoint someone as the chief executive and then pretend that everything is okay and manage everything out of Beijing. I think that's my preferred solution. And I think the sooner the CCP and Xi Jinping recognize that they're going to be able to contain the damage. They can't undo the damage, but they can at least contain the damage and perhaps begin to move forward. And also to begin addressing this larger problem they have with Taiwan.
Right now, as we speak, this is being discussed at NYU with your friend Jerry Cohn there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're looking. I mean, a lot of people in the U.S. are thinking about this. I'm not sure the message is going to get through. And Xi Jinping, if you're listening, Carl has some important points you should take note of. But here, Xi Jinping has these issues on his hands, and you have these destabilization issues. You have world image issues, reputational issues, and somehow this all features. It all connects with Kim Jong-un's recent statement that, don't tell me I'm going to have a meeting with you. I have no intention of having a meeting with you. Don't lie to the people, which undermines the U.S. further and which actually, to me, it tells Xi Jinping is the U.S. is kind of like the target lately. You can say those things and get away with it. So here we are, and we have a trade war. Here we are, and there's this whole macho thing going on with Xi Jinping about responding to the trade war. And of course, Trump is acting out of macho also. How does that feature in this? Does this all make Xi Jinping stronger or weaker to deal with the trade war and the U.S.? I mean, if he has to capitulate on Carrie Lam, if he has to accede to the demands of the protesters on the street, in some way at least, I mean, it's a smart approach, and I certainly agree with you, but in some way it makes Xi Jinping look weaker. Yeah. And if he does that, how does that work? How does that connect with the trade war?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jay, and I would be crazy to give you a good answer because I'm not sure I have one. But yeah, I mean, certainly Xi wants a deal, and the problem is Trump kind of knows that, and so they really are playing, a bet you don't dare kind of game with each other. To me, I think again, Xi Jinping needs to cut some losses here and move ahead. And so to me, I think if Xi could get some big leaf of movement on sanctions relief, I think he would sign on immediately for phase one, because phase one is fairly inconsequential in terms of his longer term economic strategy of developing his own technology and dominating certain tech areas. So I think he can do that again because he controls all the information inside China much better than Trump will ever be able to control in the United States, much to Donald Trump's chagrin, of course. But I think he can still manage that. So if he can take a small win on sanctions relief, and that's kind of the big question of the day, is will Trump concede that? Because I think Trump is, in Trump's mind, I think he's kind of convinced himself that he doesn't have to. And I think that's sort of the sticking point at this point, is how much we're really going to give in on sanctions. So I think if Xi Jinping could get some minor concession on sanctions relief, maybe back to 10% or something on the stuff that's been moved to 25, some big leaf like that, then I think he could say, okay, we've solved that. Now let's move on and show the world that China is modernizing, that we recognize that part of our modernization process has to be a better voice for the people, because that's the message that he tries to deliver inside China also. I think that's how they connect. And then the question is how smart is Trump going to be in facilitating that and taking advantage of it in the long term rather than short-term gains? Because that's my concern, is that the American position on this thing has been focused on short-term gain, and the Peter Navarro school of thought that says just blast them with sanctions and they'll capitulate, and I think that's not a very helpful model in the broader scheme of trying to resolve this issue, because ultimately the United States should have an interest in a humane answer to both Xinjiang and Hong Kong. It's not. It may make some Americans feel good to say Hong Kong is rebellious and it's going to create problems for China. Yes, but we also have to recognize that China's there. It's not going away, and we somehow have to figure out how to accommodate China in the context of a better Hong Kong, but not a perfect Hong Kong.
But in any event, it will never be the same.
Correct.
Carl Baker,
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming down.
Thanks.
Aloha.